Earlier we spoke to Mr. Ian Cameron, who is Action Society leader.
It's the highest murder rate that South Africa has had in nearly 2 decades. We're looking at about 86 people being murdered per day. That's almost 4 people per hour. Sexual offences like rape is also up. We're looking at around 135 to 136 rapes per day. So really the picture that was painted today by the minister was certainly not one to be excited about. In fact, things really are not looking good. And I don't quite understand how he says that the different operations are being implemented successfully. We're not seeing or feeling the results. It almost felt like the minister lives on a different planet to the rest of us. It was almost as though he's completely removed from the reality that the majority of South Africans face.
Now, you also referenced on your X page, Ian, that Minister Cele actually boasted the historic DNA backlog, which was eradicated, and you challenged this to be untrue and referenced a counter case file. Tell us more about why you think this is, sir.
Yeah, so at the moment, especially in townships, we've got several cases that we do oversight on, right? And there's a massive problem with children being murdered in South Africa. It's also on the increase. And one such a case is the case of little Mia Botha that was murdered in the winelands in the Western Cape just over about a year and a half, 2 years ago. I think it's 508 days today. And until this day, the DNA results are outstanding. And so I can go through many cases. The case of Liesel de Jager, Bokabo Po, Cleo Deco, the list just goes on. The point I'm trying to make is that the so-called backlog that he speaks of that's been cleared is definitely they're not the same one that we're all referring to. Because again, on the ground, when we speak to detectives that often expose wrongdoing inside SABS to us in order for us to blow the whistle, they make it very clear that something like DNA is not up to standard, or these tests and results. And so with the majority of forensic centers in South Africa, they're under immense pressure. They've got a shortage of a lot of the technology, and as well as other, kit that they need to use or resources that they need to use. The point I'm trying to make is just, it was almost as though the minister underestimates the intelligence of the public. He shared a story that none of us could relate to. It's almost like the president at SONA. It was difficult to relate to the country that he was speaking of, because when I go to Crossroads or Nyanga or Alex or Tembisa, I don't get the feeling that we live in the same place, and they're certainly not making inroads. In fact, in the majority of those communities, if you ask the people about the police, the first reaction I get is they usually start laughing.
Now, you spoke about this a bit earlier on, Ian. I mean, the alarming rate of murder cases as well as GBV cases being on the rise. And I think the president, as you've just also alluded to, made some remarks about programs that are currently in place to combat the scourge of GBV in SONA. Yet these numbers are stating quite the opposite. What do you think still needs to be done to really deal with the high levels of crime in this country then?
Yeah, so I think it's important to refer to that, because the very fund that the president established to combat GBV specifically, according to my information, has released over 70 million rand over the past year for initiatives to combat GBV, yet we don't see any change. So I must ask the question, is the money being used properly? Where is it really going? Because we're not seeing an impact. Okay, but be that as it may, what needs to be done? Well, first of all, obviously, and I think people probably laugh when I say it, but I think the police minister needs to go. But apart from that, when we look at specifically at the South African Police Service, I would say that we need to do a skills audit of the management of the South African Police Service. We need to determine who was appointed according to merit, who was appointed because of politics, and if it is the latter, they need to be removed. We need to polygraph the entire leadership team and then determine which of them were possibly involved in some kind of corruption or criminal activity. And so we can start rooting out the rotten apples in the top structure for that to siphon down. But there's no point in us sticking plasters on wounds at station level that actually needs surgery with the root cause that we see with the leadership problem in the South African Police Service. I mean, yesterday, Minister Cele tells police at the National Police Day event in Gauteng that the South African Police Service is among the best police services in the world. And I think to myself, but only 14.5% of murders are actually solved. So that leads me to say, that not only do we need to improve forensic capacity, but detective capacity. We've got a huge shortage. There's a mass exodus in SAPS at the moment. Training is not up to standard, and we've got a huge shortage of detectives and specialized units. I can go on for days. The point I'm trying to make is that the leadership change needs to occur. We need to get rid of cadre deployment in the South African Police Service. If we don't do that, we cannot expect reality on ground level to really change. I went as far as saying today that most communities in South Africa must lawfully mobilize, organize, arm, and train themselves, obviously within the framework of the law, to make sure that they've got some kind of defense mechanism against violent crime. Because if I look at these statistics, you are on your own.